the average lifetime of a business aircraft is 46 years. Any new aircraft that rolls off, the new G700, the Gulfstream G700 that's being produced today, will still be flying, probably into 2060, maybe even 2070. So we need solutions that are going to work on the existing fleet because it's still going to be flying by 2050 by the time we hit our kind of, our net zero goals. So SAF really is, the main option for that because it works as a solution for existing airplanes.
Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. I'm your host, Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simplifying. Every Thursday, I have important conversations with top aviation executives, technology entrepreneurs, and policymakers helping aviation take climate action. Conversations that help separate the signal from the noise. Whether you are a frequent flyer or an airline executive, if you care about sustainability or simply love traveling, welcome aboard. My guest today is Kennedy Ricci. He's the president of 4Air, which is the first sustainability solutions provider focused on aviation, business aviation, building voluntary programs, and also helping operators with environmental regulatory compliance. Kennedy and I speak about how they've been able to push a lot of SAF through their system in business aviation, how Assure, their book and claim system, is helping drive SAF usage where SAF is not actually available, and how they are working with Breakthrough Energy and others on contrails and beyond. It's a very inspiring tale on how even independent companies like 4Air can push the agenda when it comes to sustainable aviation. I hope you enjoy this. Kennedy, great to have you and be speaking together once again. You've been a pioneer in aviation sustainability ratings. What inspired 4Air to go just beyond carbon offsetting to include other environmental impacts like contrails and non-CO2 emissions as well?
Yeah, well, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. So when we started 4Air, we started looking at how could we make sustainability more accessible. We saw the importance sustainability was going to have in the coming years and wanted to look at how you do that comprehensively. Because I think we can look at the carbon footprint of aviation, but that's only 1/3 of aviation's impact. So it was really important, we thought, to make sure that whatever solutions we proposed would address the entire environmental impact of an aircraft. So from the very outset, we designed our program to look at the environmental footprint of contrails, nitrous oxides, carbon, and offset for the entire warming impact of all of those emissions combined. That we integrated into kind of these different levels or ratings that we have under our program. So we actually start where most programs end, with offsetting the entire flight's carbon impact. Then we look at doing the non-carbon impact as well. So we use what's called the radiative forcing impact to convert or index to convert that non-CO2 impact into an equivalent carbon one, and then offset to that warming impact. And then we look at things like using SAF via book and claim and supporting new technologies so that we look at how do we support aviation's journey to sustainability with solutions that work today, solutions that are going to work tomorrow like SAF, and ultimately technologies that will support our future decarbonization efforts.
I know we dived right into the meat of the matter. I think it's important to zoom out a little. Can you tell us what does 4Air do and who are your clients? Are these airlines we're talking about? Are these commercial aviation? Actually, I think it would be good to get an overview.
So 4Air started about 4 years ago, and we launched with helping companies implement, or aircraft operators implement, voluntary sustainability programs. So accessing things like offsets, SAF, supporting new technology. We converted that into a sustainability by the hour program. So tell us what aircraft you fly, how sustainable you want to be, and then we take care of all the rest. And we just bill it as a per flight hour program. We do some other work around regulatory compliance. So with all of the new regulations, reporting requirements, monitoring requirements, mandates that are out there, we make it very easy for operators to comply with all of those. And then we help track sustainable aviation fuel. So looking at identifying what SAF you used, tracking it through the supply chain, making sure you report it and claim it appropriately. We come in and do all of that paperwork for you. So our goal at 4Air, and when we launched it and everything we do, is just to make sustainability easy, whether that's on a voluntary basis or on a regulatory one. We want to make it accessible, comprehensive, and easy to participate in.
Okay. And are your clients then commercial airlines, or is this business or private aviation? Who's the largest chunk?
So we actually have customers across every kind of different verticals. So part of the reason we launched 4Air is because especially the general aviation space is so nuanced. You have so many different types of ownership structures. The airlines are generally pretty straightforward. Regionals and main lines are a little bit different, but they're still selling the same thing. In business aviation or in general aviation, you have everybody from someone who owns their own aircraft to rents it, to buys hours, to buy fractions, to timeshares. There's all of these different ownership structures. And the way sustainability works into each of those is very nuanced and needs kind of that nuanced approach. So we support customers across that whole spectrum, from people who fly a piston aircraft and just fly with themselves for fun, to corporations that own their own airplanes, maybe fleets as big as 5-10 airplanes in a corporate fleet, family offices, aircraft operators, fractional operators, people with 350 aircraft in their fleets, up to some airlines as well. So our approach has been able to adjust, to multiple different stakeholders across the industry.
Wow, very nicely done. And given that you're not a 20-year-old company, I think it's significant headway already. You shared some amazing statistics in terms of SAF processed through your systems recently. Are you able to share some of that?
We can. So since we've launched, we've documented or sold over 15 million gallons of SAF. So that's helping, make sure that the SAF was appropriately documented. We've been able to put more than 6 million gallons of that on our Shore SAF registry. So moving kind of, from more of the paper PDFs and Excel-based work, I think that the industry started with, to a more robust tracking platform that does a lot of the automation for this and make sure that we're ready for the next 15 million gallons. And ultimately, as the industry scales up to bigger volumes, we needed something that was going to scale with that. So we've been able to take our experience in SAF tracing and documentation already and convert that into a product that's going to help the rest of the industry grow.
Well, I want to dive a little deeper into this here, your SAF registry program. It helps operators navigate what you call the messy supply chain. Can you explain how this program makes SAF adoption easier for operators?
One of the challenges in business aviation is we don't buy directly from a fuel supplier. So there's a lot of intermediary owners of the fuel. And so for SAF, that means the batch of fuel that you might buy from a fuel supplier is going to get broken up and sold to different users. So the same, maybe even truckload of SAF, 8,000 gallons of SAF, could be sold to 3 or 4 different parties. Where the airlines are probably buying more direct, large quantities from the fuel suppliers, we're seeing this kind of get, resold throughout the supply chain. And when it really matters what feedstock of, SAF you purchased and what the blend of that fuel was to appropriately report those emission reductions, we needed something that appropriately tracked and allocated those SAF and those emission reductions through what is a more complex supply chain. So that's where a lot of our initial work at 4Air started. That's what Assure was built off of, to make sure that we can appropriately track. It's really an inventory management tool to show who owns it and show it through the supply chain as that ownership changes. But we knew if we could solve it in business aviation, which was a very complex, fuel supply chain kind of ownership structure, we would make a very easy solution for airlines as well. So we've been able to take kind of that business aviation learning and make it into a product that supports airlines as well.
So the needs, though, for business aviation are quite different from major airlines, right? So how do you tailor sustainability solutions for different types of operators?
That's certainly one of the most important pieces to it, because a corporate flight department that's using, SAF has a very different incentive and reporting requirement behind using it than an airline or a large aircraft operator. Business aviation operators, certainly large ones, have a lot of the same reporting requirements as commercial airlines. So things like Refuel EU or the EU ETS, the UK ETS, all the different free SAF allowances and other airport level incentives, some of the US tax credits now. A lot of the large operators have those same reporting needs. So we've been able to work with them and make sure that that's a similar kind of product that a commercial airline would need. But I think that's one of the things that we've really been intentional behind, is we've designed the system to accommodate reporting needs of both kind of ends of the spectrum. So someone who just needs kind of the reporting for their GHGP or CDP reporting at a corporate level, corporate aircraft, as they're using SAF, they need to report the emission reductions from this. That is a different, report and an element that they need versus an airline, but we're able to help support both and do that through Assure.
Interesting. And there are multiple parties you're dealing with here. There are the suppliers and the operators. How do you bridge the gap between the two parties?
So I think it comes down to that's really our main crux, is doing a lot of work, going back and getting documentation, making sure that we're working through the supply chain, making it auditable to prove exactly what, SAF we took. We do a lot of work talking all the way down to a regulator around an end use kind of claim of SAF, back all the way up to the producer to make sure we've got a trail of documents and paperwork that prove exactly what is needed for that claim. So it's been just part of our kind of core work as working that up the supply chain, making sure we can get the appropriate documentation, linking it together. And through Assure, we built a tool that a fuel distributor or fuel supplier can use themselves. So it's very flexible in that if you want to track your own fuel in the system, there's flexibility to bring in, from any kind of source of fuel or any fuel supplier, you can add that into a single cohesive inventory. But we also allow people to transfer between accounts on the platform. So by almost rebuilding kind of the supply chain ecosystem on the platform, it makes it very easy to kind of build the documentation of the supply chain through that process. So that's been kind of core to our work and something part of the system.
That's very interesting. You mentioned Assure earlier. How is Assure different from 4Air? And can you tell us a bit about the product as well?
Yeah, so Assure we've branded as its kind of its own product offering, because I think it's something that really goes beyond just business aviation. So we kind of launched that product last May, I think it was, and have been still growing it. Part of our vision behind it is, SAF tracing is already pretty complex. You have to document a few, key things around what was the fuel, what was the blend of the fuel, where did it come from, proof of purchase, proof of ownership behind it. But this is going to get more complex, I think, not less, because as more regulatory programs emerge, you're going to have this overlapping stackability of regulatory credits, both at the production level and the end operator level. And the choices a producer makes about what they claim their fuel towards might affect what you as an end operator can claim your fuel towards. So we've designed the whole system with kind of this regulatory reporting, need in mind, because I think the next billion gallons of SAF really come from a regulatory focus. It's going to be meeting SAF mandates. It's going to be claiming tax credits. So making sure that we've got an easy system to track that, to optimize what we claim our SAF towards, to make sure we reflect the nuances of purchasing from one producer over another. Our vision has been that's really critical, I think, towards the next kind of growth of SAF. So Assure was built with that kind of larger product vision in mind, and then going beyond just what 4Air does. So 4Air is a user of Assure. We're certainly a customer of it, but something that goes even beyond what our core service at 4Air is.
So essentially, Assure is a book and claim system that anyone can use.
Correct. And I think book and claim is one of the chain of custody mechanisms it supports. We like to kind of talk about, there's an ISO standard for what a book and claim chain of custody is, just as there is for separate identification, segregation, mass balance. And so any one of these supply chain mechanisms Assure can handle. And that was one of our goals, is because you're buying fuel physically, you're buying fuel via book and claim. We have to support, especially for business aviation, a little bit, like I said, more complex kind of chain of custodies as how that fuel gets to an end operator. So book and claim is part of what we support, but it's really an inventory management tool that even goes beyond just a registry.
Got it. Now, I know we've spoken about SAF. Let me move to non-CO2. You recently had a study on contrails that showed that just adjusting 50 flights out of 16,888, almost 17,000 flights, could reduce the non-CO2 impact by 50%. How are you helping operators implement these insights?
It was a great kind of revelation when we did that study. So a lot of the research that's been out there, is focused on the aviation as a whole's impact on contrail production. But business aviation, we have different operating, kind of mission. A typical mission is very different than commercial aviation. Our aircraft have different service ceilings. So we wanted to take a look at what's, a little bit more of a business aviation look at contrails. So we followed, I think it was 23 aircraft over the course of a whole year. It was just under 17,000 flights that these aircraft performed. Some were US based, some were Europe based. And we looked at, when were they making contrails? What were the types of flights? How long were those flights typically? And we found some interesting things where it was a lot of times a shorter mission. So it was when the aircraft wasn't climbing all the way up to its service ceiling because it was a shorter flight, and either air traffic control held them lower, or it just didn't make sense to climb all the way up for that. It was going to take too long, and the mission didn't require it. So those were the bulk of ones where we made contrails, and it was really a very small minority of flights. And like I said, it was just about 50 of those flights that ended up making 50% of the contrail impact of that whole sample of 17,000. So we looked at those flights a little deeper and said, okay, on those specific flights, based off where the contrail region was and how long the flight was, could we have flown a little higher? Could we bumped up the cruise altitude by 2,000 feet and actually flown higher to get above the contrail region? Or were we kind of at the lower end of it? Could we have flown 2,000 feet lower to get below it? Or was it so deep that it just didn't make sense? And about 70% of the flights, we actually could have flown above the contrail region. The flight was long enough. The aircraft had the service ceiling to do it. The mission would have allowed it. We didn't know the contrail was there. We didn't think it was something we needed to know to do. So that is very low hanging fruit, because now it's not a fuel or, it's not a carbon or contrails discussion. It's an opportunity to save both if we know that that's where they are, and if we have the ability to work through or with air traffic control on them. So that's something we're working, on both sides on. So we're now just under 300 aircraft. We are footprinting every single flight against a contrail prediction model and generating contrail alerts when we see kind of that we might go near a contrail region, starting to work with the dispatchers of those companies and say, okay, is this a mission where we can maybe bump the altitude up a little bit? It's great because there's no trade-off to it. We're going to save a little extra fuel. We have to climb a little bit more, but it's just we're not kind of, at risk of burning extra carbon. We're actually saving it, but it requires a little extra work with air traffic control because they're usually on routes where air traffic control wants us lower. So now we have to communicate with ATC a little bit in your control and explain, why we're doing this. And one of the most interesting pieces of it was the same fleets. So we looked at same aircraft types, same mission profiles, US and Europe. Those same airplanes were making contrails almost twice as frequently in Europe as in the US. So that immediately begged the question.
I wonder why that is.
Exactly. And it was air traffic control. It was shorter missions. They didn't want us climbing as high because it's more workload on ATC. But in the US, it was a little bit more flexibility. And so it was easier to climb to the altitudes we wanted. So that was an immediate, aha, okay. So if we just start flying like we do in the US and Europe, which is way easier said than done, but that kind of communication, that data that we now have gives us a lot more ability to go to air traffic control and within Europe, air control, and explain, no, we're asking for higher because of contrail avoidance. We're asking for this to reduce our climate impact. This is kind of low-hanging fruit that if you're willing to work with us, we can achieve. So that type of contrail predictions that we're doing the same thing for contrail post-flight reporting and looking at, based off weather models. So it's not a perfect approach to it, but it's the best we've got for now to get ahead of how we approach our non-CO2 footprint in aviation.
This is interesting. I'm getting into the weeds here a little. How do you measure things like humidity and whether that the contrail is cooling or warming, or are you not doing that yet?
So we're using a contrail prediction model. We're using one from Breakthrough Energy. And so they're using weather data and put into that COSIP model. So again, it's not, perfect way to measure, but it's especially when we don't really have a fuel trade-off to fly a little higher. It's a way that we can start to test how contrail mitigation might work into business aviation. It is interesting to see because we will we'll footprint a flight. We'll do a prediction for a flight. And then the departure time of that flight moves 2 or 3 hours. And all of a sudden you see what was thought to be a cooling contrail has now become a warming one. And so there are a lot of even kind of last minute changes in our space that we have to be cognizant of, where we might not do a contrail mitigation because we thought we'd make a cooling contrail. And now all of a sudden it's become a warming one because the departure time shifted. That's not really something commercial aviation worries about quite as much. They have a little bit more strict schedules than we do. We have flights get canceled all the time, reassigned to different airplanes. So that last minute kind of rerun and flexibility is, I think, really important. But on the European side, it's been a great story so far because it's something the pilots have really held on to or gotten a hold of, because it's something they can do to reduce their impact. They see it, they understand that that's really in their control. Using SAF is something of a larger kind of company decision, but choosing the cruise altitude or trying to work with ATC once we're in flight to get a higher altitude when we can is something that's in the pilot's control. And so they love this as a chance for them to get involved.
Are the pilots on board?
They are, especially within Europe. I think they're it takes some education. I think the whole idea of a contrail as having an impact at all is completely new to most people. We really, the seminal study really came out in 2021 that helped us take a look at this. So it's only, we've been understanding contrails and how to avoid them for 70 years, but to really understand their warming impact has been just in the last 3. So
Right.
some education, but they like the ability that's in their control.
Got it. And may I ask, what was the additional fuel burn in trying to avoid these contrails?
Well, that's the thing is none, because we're actually flying at a higher cruise altitude that is putting the aircraft in a more efficient flight. It just, I think part of the education back to some of academia has been the aircraft is not always flying at an optimal, flight configuration. There is an envelope. It's not just, there's not one ideal altitude always. So it might be anything between 41 and 43 might be kind of a good operating envelope for a specific flight or specific mission. We're just kind of, changing our selection within that envelope. So there really hasn't been, for us at least, because we've got the higher service ceilings, some business aircraft can get as high as 51,000 feet. Contrail regions really top out about 41,000 feet for the regions like the US, North Atlantic, and Europe. And so we're very easily able to get above those regions. And in most cases, in flights in the US, you're above those regions anyway. And so the only time you're making contrail in the US flights were kind of during climb and descent, or short flights where, you just didn't climb all the way up.
Right. This is such a perfect example of how business aviation can serve as a petri dish for the entire industry when it comes to aviation. So I'm delighted to hear the work that you've been showcasing. I'm guessing these were the FlexJet trials that you did, right?
Correct. We've done it with some smaller operators as well on the contrail mitigation.
Got it. There's the general aviation program you've launched as well, which makes sustainability accessible to private pilots. Can you tell us a little about this?
Right. So even at, the shorter end of kind of general aviation, piston aircraft, we wanted a product that would help address emissions within, very small aircraft. So a piston aircraft burns, at an efficient level, 10, maybe 15 gallons an hour. We're talking a thousandth of what a commercial airliner does, but there's still a pilot base there that wants to address their impact. So we have what we call a general aviation program, and targets kind of people who would rent aircraft or student pilots. We call them owner operators, people who own their own aircraft and fly it themselves. This is kind of that group. So we built the program, same 4 levels we have at our general or business aviation program, just applied towards piston aircraft and smaller aircraft. And so, these programs maybe cost you $1 or $2 per flight hour at that level. Very, very cheap to kind of get involved. And so it's been a great way to kind of show awareness, I think, of sustainability at the kind of more intro pilot level, because a lot of people I don't think understand that, pilots don't start on airliners. They start at, Cessna 172. Every pilot does. So even those aircraft are ones that we want to include in sustainability and not lose sight of.
While we're on general aviation, you recently have been piloting a electric pipistrel in the UK. Are you able to talk about that?
We can. So we are leasing a Pipistrel Electro, fully electric aircraft. We based it in Fair Oaks outside of London with a flight school there. And we're essentially subsidizing some of the costs so that student pilots or people who just want to come see what the aircraft is can fly on a kind of for a reduced rate. And the initial reception has been great. We have a waiting list of about 30 people to come out and see or fly the aircraft. And I've flown it before. I think what is so striking about an electric aircraft is its simplicity. So you get in an aircraft, a typical piston aircraft, there's a lot of engine management that you need to do even before starting the airplane to make sure it's in a good condition. This aircraft, you get in, it's 4 switches and you're ready to go. Batteries on, lights on, avionics on, engine on, ready to taxi. And so the simplicity behind it, I think, is really striking. It is much quieter. I was surprised even to see that you can notice the noise difference. Before you're ready for takeoff, the engine the propeller will stop, because when you're not moving, you don't need the propeller to keep running. So that's a very weird sight to a pilot to see, the engine not turning right before you're supposed to be taking off. But the controllability behind it, the simplicity of it, I think it's going to be a really big impact in the training environment, getting people involved in aviation. And by the way, the charging a full hour kind of use costs you $3. So it is way more, cost effective as a training platform And I think you'll see a big, especially as the batteries get better. This is just the first iteration. You're not going very far in this, and you can't do a full license on it yet, but you can do maybe 70% of a private license on the aircraft. And it's cool to see where we're starting with it today. So, we have a long way to go, but we wanted to show people, what it looks like today, get comfortable with it, get a chance to come and see it. So that's been really popular so far.
Wow, it has been a long time. I have been waiting to get my private pilot license. I think this is the sign I've been waiting for.
I think so. You can finally do it on an electric aircraft.
Exactly. Do you fly yourself?
I do. Yes, I've got a flight instructor's rating, so I can actually teach you when you come out to the aircraft.
Now we're talking. I love how these partnerships are falling into place from FlexJets on the contrail reduction with NevoAir, I believe, on the electric aircraft as well in the UK. You're also working with universities like Cambridge and Waterloo in Canada on sustainability research. How do these fit into the overarching offerings at 4Air?
Yeah. So this goes back to kind of the core of our program is, right, how do we make it accessible and easy for people to participate in sustainability? So we help people kind of get access to carbon offsets, help people get access to SAF through book and claim. What's the future of aviation look like? It's going to be electric or hydrogen in some form, whether that comes in through hybrid, forms of propulsion. Hydrogen productions comes to help produce, SAF or reduce the carbon intensity of jet fuel. There's areas that these play in, and even future, SAF production or contrails avoidance and better research behind it. So we wanted to find a way to support research programs like at those universities with kind of our voluntary programs that we have. So the highest level of our program, you'll have offset 300% of your carbon footprint. You'll have used SAF to reduce 5% of your carbon footprint from that hour. So about 20% blended SAF kind of usage on a flight hour. And then you have to contribute $2 per metric ton of carbon emitted towards research that'll support things like hydrogen and electric. So the idea was, well, we don't really have, as much as the Pipistrel is fun to fly today, it's not something we can really use to, displace large emissions. But let's fund the research that's going to help lift all boats. Instead of kind of investing in a technology, let's invest in the underlying research and science that we need to help technologies advance. So things like, helping support battery technology, hydrogen storage, how we look at the whole system of how we would use hydrogen in an aircraft. What does that aircraft look like? These are programs that we've supported through kind of our Aviation Climate Fund, we call it. And so that partnership with the University of Cambridge, we've been part of their Aviation Impact Accelerator for 3 years now, and have taken kind of, this way to use our voluntary program to support those future technologies that'll decarbonize aviation.
Very interesting, and thank you for supporting, the very important work that comes out of universities, which can then be applied right away in a non-hierarchical organization like yours compared to a large airline, for example, which takes a much longer time to implement it. Can you tell us about the 4-tier rating system for sustainability goals? Did you develop these tiers, and how have they been helping operators progress in their sustainability journey?
Yeah. So 4Air, the name actually comes from the 4 pillars of sustainability that ICAO set out. We've got things like carbon offsets as market-based measures, SAF, new technology, operations. And we wanted to distill those 4 pillars into levels that somebody could participate in. So the idea was we wanted to have kind of an objective mark on how sustainable one operator was compared to another. So you could see, how forward-looking was maybe flying with one person versus another. And that's where the kind of the motive behind the system came from. So we, like I said, wanted to start with carbon offsets, or really carbon offsetting the entire footprint, the entire hour of an aircraft as our level 1. It's really not that expensive to do. We're talking tens of dollars per flight hour to offset, 100% of the carbon footprint. So we said, let's start with that. It's a solution that's here today. It's not expensive to get involved with, to get started with. And then let's look at how we kind of move up from there. So level 1, you have to offset 100% of that footprint. Level 2, you have to offset 300% of that footprint, doing the carbon and non-carbon equivalent impact of that flight hour. Level 3, you have to use about 20% blended SAF to achieve a 5% emission reduction. So it actually looks at how do we not just offset, but reduce. And then at level 4, we look at supporting those new technologies. And we kind of translated the pillars that ICAO has set out into kind of what can we do today? What's going to be the solution for tomorrow? And then what's the solution out in the future? And let's build a program that shows people who are level 4 are really looking towards that kind of, future emission reductions. The rating levels are dynamic, so they've been kind of the same for the last few years, but we constantly look at each year, are these the right, radiative indexes to be using? Right now, if we say 300%, it sounds like a random number. It's actually a very specific number, 3.0, which is the global warming potential of 100 years. Look at the non-CO2 emissions, but we're always evaluating. Is there a better metric we should be using? Is 20% still the right benchmark for SAF usage? Should it be heading higher emission reduction goals? And so each of the benchmarks serve as such, to help you compare operators against each other and help set a reference point for how your sustainability program should work. And the great thing is it's designed kind of as a ladder. So you start at level 1 and then operators say, well, what more can I do now? Well, great. Let's look at level 2. Let's look at level 3 and look at kind of moving up. And so we get a lot of questions, do people just stop at level 1? Do they just use carbon offsets and say, I'm done? That's actually not what we see at all. It's really the starting point. It gets you in the door. It gets you starting thinking about this, putting a price on carbon. And every single one of our operators that uses SAF started with offsets. And it really becomes that entry door to help them start with getting with something in sustainability and moving into things that are more direct into aviation or will eventually be, our future emission reductions, future solutions.
Oh, that is fantastic. I know we spoke about SAF, we spoke about contrails. What future technologies excite you in terms of the potential? We also spoke a little about electric, in terms of the potential for decarbonizing aviation.
I think, SAF is certainly our main solution. I think we talk about its ability to be used on the entire fleet, but there's an element of this where the average business aircraft, at least, the average lifetime of a business aircraft is 46 years. So it'll be in service for, 40 years. Any new aircraft that rolls off, the new G700, the Gulfstream G700 that's being produced today, will still be flying, probably into 2060, maybe even 2070. So we need solutions that are going to work on the existing fleet because it's still going to be flying by 2050 by the time we hit our kind of, our net zero goals. So SAF really is, the main option for that because it works as a solution for existing airplanes. But I would say, most exciting, and we talked about where electric, I think, will have a really big impact on the training market, opening up access to aviation by making it, cheaper to get a license. But I think contrails, for me, that's been a passion project. I think for the last few years, we've seen the importance from that from day one. And it's a really cool low-hanging fruit for aviation. It's, especially for business aviation, easy for us to avoid them if we just know where they are, fly above, we're not burning extra fuel. And so it's a way we can really have a win-win to reduce CO2 emissions and reduce the non-CO2 impact. We just need kind of better forecasting abilities, better monitoring abilities. We're doing some work about kind of how you bring in ground-based cameras and satellites to monitor real-time contrail formation, not just use a weather model, but use that data to improve the models going forward as well. So there's a lot of exciting stuff, I think, on the horizon around that, but contrails will be a really great opportunity for a near-term win.
There's so much to act, right? We've often spoken about the flack that business aviation gets when it comes to just emissions or private aviation. How do you think private aviation or business aviation can act as a petri dish? Something I mentioned earlier, and you and I have spoken about. How do you think we can serve as a petri dish for what are the right things to do, not just talk about when it comes to sustainable aviation?
I think there's a few ways, and people without a kind of even knowledge of business aviation might not kind of appreciate it. But take a look at the flight deck of a commercial aircraft in operation today, and then take a look at the flight deck of a business aircraft. The technology difference between the two is immediately striking because you see how much more futuristic really that flight deck looks from business aviation. The technologies that we develop in business aviation then get carried over to commercial aviation. And we've done that for years in avionics. Winglets that you see on every single aircraft were first developed on a business jet. A lot of kind of, different operations and other, kind of safety procedures have developed in business aviation and then have been adapted into commercial. So there's a precedent for this, around safety where we've seen business aviation kind of, be the leader on developing some of these technologies, some of these procedures, and then they start to get adopted into commercial aviation. And I think sustainability will be very much the same way. So today, business aviation uses about 2% of the global fuel usage of aviation. The 98% goes to other, commercial aviation or military. And if you look at global SAF production, we're probably taking somewhere closer to 10 to maybe even 15% of global SAF production is going into business aviation. So we're really punching above our weight and helping support SAF in its early days. This is a time when SAF is still kind of scaling up to larger production capacities. that's, still a little bit more expensive phase, especially for smaller, more advanced producers. It's an area where business aviation is helping those technologies get off the ground, get through this initial kind of scale up. Something we've worked closely on to help align business aviation demand with kind of future SAF production, and show that business aviation can help develop, even SAF in ways that will support commercial aviation's kind of future decarbonization. So contrails, even SAF, I think, are ways that business aviation can help, just as it has in safety, really develop kind of the best practices and help scale these technologies up by being kind of that first premium user, and then better at scale for commercial aviation.
Fantastic. I am full of hope at this point and optimism, Kennedy. This is very, very exciting. The final part of this interview is called the rapid fire round, in which we get to know you a bit more personally. So I'll start with something simple, like what's your favorite airline?
Well, I think airline's a tough one because we work with a few of them, but I'll say, Southwest was our launch partner on Assure. So we've been a great partner with them for the last few years. And doing some, the work in the private aviation. I think we've got some, FlexJet's been a great supporter of us on a lot of the programs we want to do. So maybe I'll say FlexJet as mine.
Okay. I think it's the first time they've been mentioned on the show. Your favorite book?
Favorite book's also a tough one. I think if I'm thinking about sustainability, for me, Hot, Flat, and Crowded by Thomas Friedman was one of the first books I ever read that made me think about sustainability, made me think about what's the impact of us kind of as a species grows and develops more. He's had a great kind of follow-on called Thanks for Being Late. I think that was really enlightening too. The other one I'll add is a book called Energy by Richard Rhodes that goes through the history of how we moved from using biomass to coal to oil to now we're back to biomass. But it was the most telling thing about that was how each one was a solution for the last. Oil was actually a solution to help reduce the pollution that coal created. Coal was a solution to help reduce the deforestation we were causing by using biomass as a fuel source. And so I think very much, it's each, neither has been perfect, but each has been an improvement on the last. And I think that was a really kind of eye-opening look at how energy's changed in kind of since the Industrial Revolution.
That's very interesting because I'm trying to apply this to aviation now, and it's hard to decarbonize. So we can't just say, oh, what will replace coal, then oil, then what's next, right? And yes, there is SAF, but aviation is hard to decarbonize in general. So it's not like wind or solar. You can't put solar panels on a wing and fly around the world. Exactly. Not yet, right? So I think that's what makes this in this space very exciting to solve right now. A favorite city?
So I figured a lot of people say large cities. I'm going to go with Sedona, back in my backyard in Arizona. That was when I got my private license. That was the first airport I flew to, and I think it's just one of the most kind of unique. It's a very unique city. Nothing looks like that in the world.
Oh, very nice, very unique indeed. Favorite movie?
I'm going to go Field of Dreams for a little baseball side.
Okay. What do you do in your free time?
Realistically, contrails, but maybe on a more fun side, we go flying. I do have a passion for it, and I think this has been a fun way to merge two passions, sustainability and aviation.
Very nice. You keep a lookout behind your tail for a contrail?
I do. I'm not flying too high. I think that I'm okay.
Okay. What is something you'd like to learn?
I'd like to learn another language. I've done some work. I'm actually an Italian citizen, but I need to work on learning Italian, I think, as a second language.
Just move your hands. It's easy. It's half the job. What is the best advice you received?
To be passionate about what you do, but compassionate about how you do it. And so to find something that you can really, own as yours and be passionate about it, but keep compassionate with how you go about it.
Lovely. I love the sound of it, and I will definitely write this one down. Kennedy, it is a pleasure speaking. Thank you for all the work that you're doing in pushing the industry forward. I love what 4Air has done, both from contrails and electric perspective, and of course the SAF volumes that have got through Assure are quite commendable. So congratulations, and we look forward to working with you.
Yeah, thank you as well.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air. Aviation is one of the hardest to decarbonize industries, yet there are multiple paths to get to net zero. Awareness is key to a green future. So please give us your support to help our sustainable aviation insights reach a wider audience. You can do this by sharing this episode on your network, on LinkedIn, Twitter, or even WhatsApp. Or perhaps you might consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this episode. You can start a conversation with us by writing to us at podcast@simplifying, that's simply with an I.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website green.simplifying.com and join the movement. Sustainability in the Air is an original podcast by Simplifying. The show is produced by Juraj Toth in Slovakia. Dirk Singer is our Director of Sustainability, who leads research for each interviewee out of Greenwich, UK. Shubhadeep Pal is our Supervising Editor based out of Mumbai and Singapore. The articles are written by Ayushi Badola in Dehradun in India and Mira Hull in Montreal, Quebec. Creative design is led by Ligia Esteve in Montreal. Baiba Drimen is the project director for the show based out of Valencia, Spain. Special thanks to Wendy Sim in Singapore. And I'm Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simplifying and your host. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.